Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. As we go through today's webinar, if you have any questions, please type them into the questions box on your screen and we'll get those answered at the end. With that being said, Shawn, I will kick it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jane. Thanks, everybody, for joining here. We appreciate it. As usual, we try to keep these pretty quick, about 20 minutes or so. My name is Shawn Litchfield with P3 Propane Safety. Joining us today, we are thankful to have Terry Babcock, Supervisor of Technical and Safety Training at Superior Plus Propane, along with Leon Henry, Technical Trainer for Superior Plus Propane. So today, we're going to be talking about most common safety documentation errors that we see out in the field, but also touch on kind of the consequences and things that can happen if they are not, completed properly, and that if your documentation is sort of lacking. So with that said, I did just want to maybe kick it to you, Terry, first, and then to Leon. Just do a quick maybe introduction of yourself. Oh, I think you're muted, Terry. Sorry. Maybe we'll start with Leon. Why don't you introduce yourself, Leon?
Well, sure, Shawn. Good afternoon. My name is Leon. As Shawn stated, I am one of the technical trainers for Superior Plus Propane, and I also oversee some of our locations on the P3 platform.
Terry, can we hear you now?
I think so. Can you hear me now, Shawn? So
yes.
My apologies there. Technical difficulties. It's been that kind of a day, you know. So, but yeah, Terry Babcock, Supervisor of Technical and Safety Training for Superior Plus Energy. 34 years in the business, so a lot of things that we see with P3 have been advantageous to our business for sure. So, but we'll get into that in a little bit, I guess, right, Shawn? So,
that sounds good. Awesome. Well, thank you guys again for joining. So we'll kind of start out, Leon. I'll kind of kick it to you. You've dealt a lot with a lot of this stuff, kind of more than really anybody that we work with, I'd say. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the most common things that you've seen out there.
Sure, Shawn. And everybody knows the old saying, right? The job's not finished until the paperwork's done. Well, that takes on a whole new meaning when we're dealing with safety sensitive paperwork, right? Not only does the job have to be complete, but it has to be accurate. That paperwork has to be accurate. So with that said, what are some of the things that we see more often than not? I'll start with skipping an entire section. We're doing a safety inspection and we skip the entire tank information, or we fill in the wrong information in a box, if you will. A perfect example of that would be we're looking at a tank location. Basically, when we ask the question on the tank location, we want to know, is it code compliant? Is it in an okay spot? Sometimes that gets misrepresented, and we will get information like behind the house. It's just a misunderstanding of what's being asked. And along with that, we'll see a misunderstanding of terminology as well. We confuse leak check with leak test. We confuse leak check with pressure test. And going down that same line, leak check, that whole leak check is one of the most important things that we're doing when we're doing a system inspection. And one of the things that we see often is we won't have a start time. Or we won't have an end time, or the leak check was not performed for the appropriate time, whether it be to NFPA code or to company policy.
Leon, not to interrupt you, but just it's like that they're doing the job right. It's just sometimes it's the paperwork that might, lack.
Oh, most definitely. And what happens in that arena, right? Most of the time, the technician is not intentionally doing something wrong, but we got a lot going on out there when we do an install, and sometimes we get sidetracked. We may be having a conversation with a homeowner, and I know in my experience, have I missed some of these? Sure, I have. It's the real world. I would start a leak check, and I've got other things going on along with that leak check. I don't need to stand there and watch that gauge. I'm doing other stuff. Well, I come back to my paperwork. I know I did it. I know I did it for the appropriate amount of time. I just forgot to write it down. So it's typically not intentional. It just gets missed.
Sure.
And then in that same arena, so we'll forget to put a start time, we'll forget to put an end time, we'll forget to put a hold time, or we'll be doing a leak check and we don't. Let's say we're using a 0 to 300 gauge, a test block test. We fail to capture our observed pressure, so that way we don't have what our drop down pressure was. Some of the other crazy things are we'll have a situation where a pressure test is required, and we'll document a pressure test before or after, after a leak check. So we did the leak check first, then we did the pressure test. They're creating compliance issues.
So that can't happen. You can't do the order needs to be a certain way.
Correct. The pressure test has to be completed with an inert gas before we do a leak check on new piping.
Yep.
So then we'll get into our lock and flow. We'll have lockup greater than 14 inches. We'll have lockup greater or flow. My mother did teach me English. I promise you that. Flow greater than 30%, or lockup greater than 30% of flow. Flow pressure greater than lockup. That's another one, and that's just putting it in the wrong box. So our flow pressure is higher than lockup. We just switched when we wrote it down. And Shawn, that's not, these errors not only occur with our safety sensitive paperwork for our technicians, these things can also come about with the safety sensitive paperwork that our drivers do, primarily our meter creep tests. We find some of these same issues that go along with those as well.
I think you could probably find it on any type of safety documentation, because to your point, you're out there, you're in the field, you're doing your work, but things can sidetrack you. It could be a homeowner that's out there. It could be, someone from the office calls you, you got to get to the next job, whatever it is. You could be doing anything out there, cathodic, an interruption to service, a safety, a monthly meter creep, all these things are important when it comes to documenting things properly. But again, you're doing it right, the paperwork can suffer. So I think it's really just across the board when it comes to documentation.
Right. And there, in today's world, and there's always 1,000 things going on at once, and and trying to stay, focused on that piece of paper, like I said, becomes difficult at times.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, and one of the other things that, it's not a technical documentation error, but one of the other things that we see, especially on our locations that are still on paper, is the technician may have, or driver may have put all the information on the paper, but if nobody can read it, it becomes really difficult, because now you're trying to interpret what was put on paper, and that can be challenging.
No, that's a really good point. Really good point. So I think, and those are all great examples, Leon. Appreciate that. And, I think what I was going to show, and I will in a bit, is kind of how the P3 platform can really eliminate those types of things from happening. But before I do that, I can pass it to Terry here because, Terry, you've experienced, depositions and things like that, and really have a really good understanding of why it's so important and how it can almost work against you if it isn't filled out properly. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that for us.
Yeah, absolutely, Shawn. And Leon, thanks for that. But because proper documentation is key, especially in any kind of incident or accident investigation. And I can't tell you how many depositions we've had to sit in. And some legit, some not so legit. You know what I mean, Shawn? So but just that proper documentation. If everything's filled out properly, if everything looks good, it's so much easier to go through there with the attorneys and do your depositions and see that, okay, well, this guy did everything right. This guy did everything right. Okay, so now it's a lot easier to defend what's going on. As you know, in this world, everybody wants to sue everybody, right? So, so when it comes to these kind of depositions and when there's an incident or an investigation, I mean, proper documentation is key. First thing these attorneys are looking for is your work orders, your safety inspection. Is everything clear? Is everything not clear? And Leon, you just touched on it a little while ago. The old paper documentation was, could you read it? You know what I mean? And how do you decipher that? You know what I mean? So with P3's digital platform is phenomenal with this. I mean, it's just so much easier to just see it and be able to have it with you when you have a deposition like this. First thing they're asking, paperwork, service work orders, safety inspection forms, training, right? Training is key as well. What did these guys do? Where was their training conducted? How much training was conducted? And then it goes right on down the line. So if you're in any of these depositions, they can get pretty ugly, but if you've got everything documented and everything is to a T, it just makes life a lot easier. You know what I mean? When you have to defend it. So, we had a couple incidences, here in my backyard. We actually had a explosion about 5 years ago where the guy actually did it himself, to be honest with you. But you know what? All the documentation was there. It was spot on. However, the attorneys will still pick little things apart where, I have to be quite honest with you, Shawn, and I know I'm kind of pushing the P3 thing, but you know what? It's so much nicer to have that right there in front of you when you have to defend these kind of situations. You know what I mean? Like Leon said, sometimes attorneys will pick up things and go, okay, well, what did this say? Well, on your digital platform, it's spot on. It's right there. There's nothing they cannot actually, kind of maneuver one way or the other. You know what I mean? So,
I'm just going to add to it, Terry. I mean, the size of you guys are a large company, obviously, and it's not just large companies that this type of thing matters to. It's really everybody, and you want everyone in your organization documenting things the same way because that's what you're training to, and that's what you can defend. If you've got folks doing, one person doing one thing, another guy doing another, that's not going to help you. That's gonna create an obstacle for you.
That is absolutely true, Shawn. By all means, we try to make sure that everything is consistent across the board. We operate in 30 different states now. So we want to make sure that is consistent across the board. And when it is, again, it just makes life so much easier for us when we have to do an investigation. Accidents are going to happen every day. Let's be realistic, right? But you know what? If we have the proper documentation and proper tools, again, it makes life a lot easier for us when we can sit in a deposition and say, okay, here we are. You know what I mean? This is what we're looking at. This is what we've seen. So, you know what I mean? So.
Well, that's great input there, Terry. Appreciate that. And it's clear again, just how important documentation is, proper documentation is, in terms of just being that one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle in terms of protecting everybody involved. So, you know, with that said, the technologies that we've built in to P3, can we see this okay now? You see my screen okay?
Yes,
Okay.
we can.
Great, thank you. It's really important to do this stuff because, you know, the things that happen are typically from like do-it-yourselfers or HVAC companies that come in and do something that, you know, they shouldn't be doing. And it's up to you guys to provide the documentation that's correct. And when it is correct and kind of tying it all together, you think about how it protects your company, but even take it to a different level, how this stuff protects the individual that's doing this work, right? We want them to be protected, their licenses to be protected. And that's what it's all about, because if it's poor documentation, that reflects on them. And when we can create or have tools to help teach us or guide us or in the right direction with documentation, I think that's important. So what I'm gonna do real quick here is just walk through one of our mobile safety inspections. There's, you know, many different mobile platforms, and all the technologies are built into each one of these. Now, when I get into doing a safety, I'm going to skip this section, but we do, of course, have the ability to add the equipment, the appliance information. I know some companies like yourself choose to kind of eliminate that part of the inspection, which is okay. You can kind of skip that right in P3, and then we'll start with our container inspection. Just going to enter one real quick. We'll kind of get through some of this information quickly so that we can kind of get into the real meat and potatoes of everything. So, you know, here's that input error reduction at work. So, you know, Leon, you had mentioned earlier the container location. You know, a lot of people might put, well, you know, it's 6 o'clock in terms of where it is at the house, or left side of the house, but that's not the intent. The intent is, does it meet requirement for 58? And this is our mobile professor at work. So just as an example, again, location, we're going to teach the user, we're going to educate the user, checking locations for compliance with NFPA 58 state or local codes, make necessary changes if not in compliance. Once in compliance, select OK. If it's not in a proper location, we can indicate corrective action required. Now, that input error reduction that we talked about, having everyone speak the same language, that's what these drop downs are for. So they can't go plugging in things that don't make sense. It's got to be the correct information, right? The other thing we'll tie this to is, you know, we don't want to be skipping things. So if I'm about to save something that lets me know I haven't done it properly, I can go back, it'll highlight that issue, and we can plug in the proper information to know that we now do have that information filled out, our paperwork's compliant, and we go through. Okay, I'll just do a quick integral system here as well, just to get through our piping, our regulator section. Okay, again, our drop downs there where they can be, and now we'll get to the leak checks. And you know, Leon, I know this is the big one.
You're not kidding, Shawn.
All right, so few things. I'm going to make a couple errors on purpose just to kind of show, you know, what can happen. And, you know, the cool thing about P3 as well is we can adjust if you guys have a particular minimum time held in terms of your leak checks, we can customize that per company. I won't input a pressure test. I'll do a flow and lockup that's kind of got some good errors there. And now just to kind of put emphasis on the types of things that we're flagging in the system. So this will list all the errors that I've made. Non-compliant leak check, I didn't do the drawdown properly, right? Non-compliant leak check, my hold time wasn't good. Insufficient flow and lockup greater than 30%. Another great feature with P3 that ties right into that sort of mobile professor type feel is all of these are hyperlinks that will point you right back to the applicable code that you're in error on. So if you're the kind of tech that really needs to understand, which most people are, they're technical thinking, we will guide you right back to the code so that you know exactly, in this instance, it's 54 Annex C, In this instance, for a hold time, 54 Chapter 8. And then our lockup greater than 30% or can't be, that's 54 Chapter 11. So when I go back, it lets me properly input the information that I need to, and then get my proper lockup and move on. So that just shows again kind of how this technology works. And Leon, maybe can you just, this is sort of maybe in a different order, but maybe talk a little bit about how this process and that type of technology has impacted the folks in the field and kind of what they were doing wrong to where they are today.
Sure. So there's a couple of key areas where this helps immensely. Number one is we always have new folks coming into the industry as a whole, whether they're coming to our company or to another company. We have new technicians coming on board. So the mobile professor in this arena is critical to the education process, if you will. Obviously, we can't get to all people, all new hires the day they come on board. So this just helps out in the educational process. And we occasionally will acquire another company. And so this also acclimates that company into, everybody, to what you said earlier, with everybody doing the same thing the same way. I mean, it's huge.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's just that this creates that platform. You can eliminate paper. You can kind of get into something that's gonna, it doesn't, not gonna say it makes you do it right, but it does. And at the same time, it helps you learn what you're doing wrong. So you stop those things from happening in perpetuity. So, well, we've actually already gone past that 20-minute marker. So I know this has all been great stuff. What I'd like to do is maybe, I don't know, Jane, if some questions have come in, we can kind of take some quick time to answer those questions from the field.
Yeah, let me see if anything has come through. It doesn't look like there's anything that's come up yet.
Okay.
Maybe we can just give it a minute or so.
Sure. And while we're doing that, we can, one thing that kind of that we can talk about is the impact. And what folks may not realize is the industry error rate is 30%. So 30% of the time, there's an error of some sorts on your documentation. And that actually goes up when you start getting into different regulatory compliance issues, things like that. And a big piece of P3 too is the photo documentation platform. But just tying it back to that error rate, the experience we've had when we launch a company, we take you from whatever you are, most folks are around that industry average of 30%, down to less than 5% in 2 weeks' time. And from that point forward, you're only getting better with the process. So realistically, clients that have launched P3 and stay close to it, their error rate can be at 0%, or maybe one or two things pop up and you quickly can remedy those things. We can kind of tie that back to, I'm looking at our dashboard item, and Leon, I think, you're a good fit for this one too. The field performance report, and maybe just talk a little bit about that and how you've utilized that stuff.
Sure, Shawn. And you hit the nail on the head. Errors are still going to happen. Even though the error rate drops substantially, we're still going to have errors here and there. Where this platform comes into play is we can do a really quick by location drop down, and I can use this field performance report not only to say, look, that I may have a location that's struggling with a certain issue. Let's say it's a leak check issue. I can then drill into that location and see if it's a single technician or a couple technicians in that location or that are struggling in a certain area, and we can tailor either coaching or training for that particular location or the particular individuals within that location. You know, it's great, and it just drops that error rate down much faster. We can almost do that in real time.
Yep. Which of course is the key, you know, eliminating that error rate so that your documentation can be 100% compliant. So I don't want to go too much over here. So Jane, are we good? Should we wrap up?
There are a few questions actually that came in. So one of them is, what type of hardware is required for P3?
As far as hardware goes, it's very simple. As long as you can have Google Chrome, it can work on really any mobile device. So, you know, we have folks using laptops, cell phones, or tablets. It's going to work on everything. It works online, it works offline, so you don't have to have a connection to the internet. It basically acts as kind of an application. So user-friendly, works for everybody. You know, we're launched with companies countrywide as you know, example, Superior Plus is countrywide at this point. So yeah. Anything else?
Great. And that kind of answered the next question about whether or not it works without Wi-Fi. So the answer is yes for that. And then seeing that there's a Cargis webinar coming up and when that would be. So that will be June 6th at 1 o'clock. And then a note, I like that this is drop down boxes and ensures our guys are speaking the same language.
Great.
How is the training conducted with the technicians? That's the next question.
Yeah, so to get going, Leon and I have done this just a few times. It's a fairly simple process. It usually takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And that's getting everybody trained on how to do the actual mobile entry on P3 for, you know, whatever applications you choose to use. So, you know, if it's a safety inspection, interruption of service, photos, cathodic, monthly meter creep, I mean, all those things. But we typically, you know, with a company like Superior, they've got their own safety team, so they will join that training. If it's someone that doesn't have the resources or have someone internally that handles safety, we always provide a actual safety technical trainer on our end to help, you know, launch our companies and get everybody trained. So, you know, these guys can answer the code and compliance questions. I can teach you how to use a mobile device. So, you know, big difference there.
Okay, and that looks like it's it for questions.
All right. Well, anything, Terry, anything you want to mention in closing?
Not too much, Sean. You know, just
Okay.
a very good webinar here. So, you know,
Right.
you know,
Leon?
Just want to say thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to, you know, to help out here.
Well, really great to have the two of you guys, a wealth of knowledge. And yeah, so thank you to Superior Plus Propane, specifically you two. And thanks everybody for joining us today. We appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.